my, I guess, ranking of all 7 schools at Legendary or level 60 to 65-ish PvP in Wizard101, of course. Now, we're going to start off with Balance. Obviously, you can see it on screen now. And yeah, at the very bottom is Balance, the class that used to be at the very top, obviously due to lore spamming back when it did as much damage as it did with how overpowered the Mantle and Weakness were. So how did they fall so far? Well, it's simple. A singular spell card got nerfed, now nuked, to the point where Balance fell way too far out of the meta. Lore spamming used to put Balance on top, meaning they could simply stack up enough pips and then just triple or quadruple lore. And because of the Mantle, it was hard to shield. And you could win from first or second like that. So, yep. And since there's no Balance set shield, that obviously kept them afloat pretty well. Nowadays, though, the tools that make a max balance good are a little out of reach for the legendary level range. Chimera, for those wanting to do that strat, is at level 68, Supernova 72, Mana Burn 75, though the House of Scales robe and Diego Amulet, I think level 41, I think that's the one. Those do give 1 copy each. King Art at level 90, Gaze 100, etc., etc. The rest of Balance's lore spells are good, but not that great. Piglets does great damage, but is basically like a baby headless. Balance's blades obviously suck, and they have no overtime, meaning the school that's meant to control the match simply cannot do so at level 60. Their heals are okay, but after the crit heal nerf, they really aren't worth using, especially because you can't really crit too reliably as a level 60. So, yeah. All Balance of Power, the new balance bubble, all that does now is keep them from getting overwhelmed by bubble users, because they used to not be able to keep up like that. Otherwise, they can't really stay afloat too well and also have a pretty tough time hitting. The golden age of Legend Balance has come and gone, and until some new pack drops of a good balance spell that can be made into TC form, it'll stay down at this last place spot. So, in other words, forever. Rest in peace. And the best counter school to Balance is going to be literally every single class. Every class has a way to counter them now, so yeah, moving on to number 6, which is Myth. Another class that used to be so much better. Myth recently took its big loss when Orthros got changed from a double hit to an AoE. Obviously this is good for PvE players, but for all the legendary Myth wizards who did PvP, this was a pretty big hit. In truth, Myth has a lot of good lore spells like Keeper, which is Baby Brim, Pigs, which does crazy damage for 5 pips, and Athena, which is the iconic hit and shield move that Myth has. But they lack a high pip spell that can OHKO, or one-hit knockout, an opponent. Before, Orthros was that spell, but after the audit, Myth only has Minotaur to carry on the double hitting trick. Not to mention, when you enchant a Minotaur, half the enchant goes to the first hit, which is just 50 damage, and the other half to the second, which pretty much means it goes to 175 on the first hit, and then I think 570 on the second. So, yeah, they started the double hit gimmick, and now it's Death that has the best double hit. So, that kind of sucks. Myth also doesn't have Shift yet. They don't have Yaga, they don't have Mystic, they don't have King Art. They don't really have any of the good spells that make Max Myth broken. They do have access to Medusa, which is the Game Ender Myth needed, but it can only fulfill its Game Ender role when your opponent doesn't stun block, and that only happens when you either can't pull them within the first few turns, or they play too fast to think they need them. Myth can, however, use Earthquake to eliminate blades, but even that doesn't do good damage, and it costs a few too many pips to be useful when trying to set up for a combo. Regardless, any school that plays fast enough can beat a Myth super easily just because they're fundamentally better. A death can even scarecrow a minion, making them useless when going against a death. Myth also has a hard time maintaining perfect accuracy along with good pips, so chalk that up as another downside to Legendary Myth PvP. And then obviously the best counter school to Myth is going to have to go to Death, because like I said before with the minions and their ability to keep up pressure. So number 5. If you couldn't tell, these last 3 classes are all kind of shells of their former selves. So we can see that Fire's old strats no longer work the way they used to. It's hard to play as a Fire, but a good Fire player can win pretty swiftly if they play their cards right. Fire Elf is an amazing pressure card. It only costs 2 pips, and it does massive amounts of damage, especially for Legendary, because you have access to Colossal, and it adds a lot of damage. Combo that into a double Brim, and you've won the game, and you only need 6 pips to start this 3-turn combo. If they shield, you can shield, or Blade, or just Elf again. Fire has a lot of options and is good at pressuring, but just is not as good at it as schools like Death or Storm. Power Link has a bigger presence there, but it's still not all that great, especially because Elf does better damage for less pips, and if you want to heal, you can rock a Life Mastery and be just fine. Their biggest weakness is that they haven't really gotten any new good lore spells. Nautilus is alright, but you know how hard it is to get Nautilus. And all the spells they used to rely on have gotten nerfed in some way. Burning Rampage first got nerfed to 3 turns to give the person going second a turn to react, but then when turn-based PvP came out, the person then got 2 turns to react, basically making it useless. Ifrit's recent nerf took away a big tool that Fire used to establish control, and then Krampus can no longer be made into TC form. And who knows, if the lore spell audit comes up soon, they may even lose Brim and fall to the very bottom of this list. And then the best counter school to Fire, gonna have to give it to Ice because of what you are about to hear. So number 4 is going to be Ice. And an Ice with a Life Mastery is nearly unkillable. I'll say that right now for pretty much every school. Most Ices go to level 66 for the Shivering Breath Robes, which gives an added 12 set resist to Fire and Storm, as well as 12 universal resist. This is the Zafaria crafted, for those unfamiliar. It's extremely broken, but that's how it is sometimes. Ice can out-heal just about anyone, their overtime game is extremely strong with Frostbite and Snow Angel, and they can even single hit pretty well with Winter Moon. Their health is a lot higher than the other classes, allowing them to tank even more, kind of making them a pseudo-life in a way. However, their ability to survive is probably their only trick. They can whittle you down with frostbites and the like, but they can't really do a super big hit unless it's a Lord of Winter, and they need 10 pips for that. So, in other words, their hitting capabilities are pretty trash. Even still, if an Ice were to get you low, any class that can heal will just win by default. If you get a good combo going, you can beat them. And the best counter school to Ice is going to have to go to Life, just because obviously you can just out-heal an Ice if they get you low. Speaking of Life, number 3 is Life. Luminous Weaver is around the same level that old lore was, but a lot of people just don't realize that and capitalize. It's extremely hard to counter Luminous spammers, especially if they're running crit, but even if you do, they can just heal off any damage you do. If you go against a good Life Wizard, you need to expect to hit with a minus 25 on at all times. Life is very good at mitigating damage, and can easily win matches by simply outlasting the other player. However, they struggle with bubble control, and as of today, Life is the only school without a 2-bit bubble, and that could definitely hurt them a lot. Their heals could also get cancelled out by Doom and Infections, so if you can keep a Life from healing, they'll be a lot easier to deal with. Overtimes are also another thing Life struggles with, because their only available one is Spinosaur that you can only buy standard TCs of. Even still, they can just get triaged, and then you're just right back where you started. Brûlé Sucre TC exist, but they're hard to come by, and they aren't worth the 6 pips and probably 10 to 15 empowers per card. So, The best counter school to life is going to have to go to death, obviously just because death can mitigate the heals really well, and also spam spells like Headless. So, number 2, death. Good utility, good resist, and good damage. Poison is very good over time. Headless is broken as hell in terms of damage for it to be a 4-pip death spell. Scarecrow's recent buff allows it to be very useful when an opponent summons a minion and just for a main drain hit. Deer Knight acts as an AoE poison, and Deadly Minotaur exists for good burst damage in case of a shield. Death's blades are very good and can set up for an OHKO against any school that is not able to keep up with Death's extremely fast tempo. They're very good against schools like Ice and Life, and are able to get around 4k health with a good setup. I run about 3.6 on mine, but with the health amulet you can get around 3900. They're able to maintain perfect accuracy and 110 plus damage. The downsides are that their spells don't really have good after effects, making most of PvP for death. I guess that's just a little downside, because there's a lot of pros. And most of Death's utility is based in drains or overtimes, not really debuffing, making it very easy for faster paced schools like Storm to capitalize and strike them down fast. Another downside is pip chance. In order to maintain perfect accuracy, you have to socket 7% accuracy jewels in both triangle slots. Unless you have double House of Scales pieces in the Crystal Unicorn, then you can get some more pips, but marginally higher. It's still relatively good. My setup uses 81% with Rock, but mathematically speaking, around every 5 turns you will receive a fail pip, and that can really come back to bite you at the worst times. The best counter school to death is going to have to be Storm for the reasons I said previously. So number 1 is going to be Storm. Incredibly high damage and passable enough resist. Crazy amounts of damage for low pips. Insane is literally 500 damage per pip, ignores set shields, and has an 80% land rate. In effect, it's very ineffective to ward against Storm at this level because of Insane. Spells like Calypso, Triton, and Catch of the Day all do obscene amounts of damage when compared to how much health people have at this level. Rain Beetle can use any fail pips that occur. Wild Bolt is another good shield breaker that has the potential to do upwards of 1k through a -70, and Lightning Elf TCs as well. They exist for the sweatier types. They fare extremely well against Exalted Wizards, being fundamentally better than 2 of the other 6 classes. Death and Balance, at least most of those at around the rank they are relative to you. Because if you're like 1500, 1600, you're going to queue a bunch of Exalteds, but yeah, they're fundamentally better than Death and Balance, even at Exalted, when the Storm is at Legendary, in every aspect except for health and a little bit of resist. Storm Owl exists as a knockout card if they're able to get enough pips, and their health is also not even that low compared to the other schools. I mean, it's like around 3k, 3.1k, which is not that far below. And then obviously they can also Stormlord just to stun somebody. The Stormlord Insane combo is not what you want to be on the receiving end of, especially at Legendary. And the only downsides to Storm are that it's hard to maintain accuracy, which doesn't even apply if you have an infal pad, and you would need to rely pretty heavily on Insane Bolts against anything with high Storm resist, because Storm is not really a blading school. The most they'll probably use is like a Rain Beetle. That's about it. But yeah, so that's probably going to wrap this one up. That is my ranking of the 7 schools for Legendary PvP in Wiz. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video, and goodbye.